So, throughout PlayStation history, there were a lot of exclusive games that we were supposed to see at some point from first, second, and third party, and some of these games had public announcements, but some of them also didn't, and eventually they were all canceled, and these are the stories of those games. Starting with perhaps some of the more well-known and recent cancellations on PlayStation 4, one game that had a full-blown public reveal alongside the original PS4 announcement back in 2013 was the Capcom game Deep Down, which at the time, that was still a working title. Little was known about the game, and Capcom didn't really say too much, but Yoshinori Ono presented the title and their new engine Pantaray, designed specifically for PlayStation 4. The first trailer was likely pre-rendered in engine, depicting a knight battling a giant dragon, but we did eventually see proper gameplay during TGS 2013 and 14, where we also learned what exactly the game was supposed to be, and it was announced as a free-to-play dungeon crawler which could be played with up to 4 players online. The game was going to have an open beta, which never happened. Then in 2015, Capcom said the original vision for the game had expanded in order to appeal to a wider audience. Nothing happened until 2018, where Capcom extended the trademark. Then in 2019, producer Yoshinori Ono told Eurogamer the game wasn't completely given up on just yet, until he left Capcom in the summer of 2020, where the status of the game is currently unknown. So technically speaking, this game was never formally canceled, but in essence, it's not looking very good for this one. Capcom did, however, renew the trademark as recently as 2020, so this could be our most optimistic title here, but I wouldn't bank on it. Another PS4 game that never saw the light of day, and this one still stings, is Silent Hills. This was supposed to be a new entry in the Silent Hill franchise, where Konami asked game director Hideo Kojima to lead the project in 2012. At some point, Sony became involved and had the opportunity to present the title during Gamescom 2014, where it was initially teased as a new game from a new studio called PT. It was released right away on the PlayStation Store for free as a first-person horror game where, upon completion, it was then revealed to be a short-form playable teaser for a new Silent Hill game, with Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro directing, with Norman Reedus playing the protagonist. Unfortunately, the relationship between Konami and Kojima began to sour around 2015. After the release of Metal Gear Solid 5, Kojima Productions as a development team with Konami was closed down, leading Kojima to establish the team again independently in December of that year. This would then lead to another Sony deal where the end result eventually became Death Stranding. But for Silent Hills, Konami announced the cancellation April 27, 2015. That, and they also pulled PT from the PlayStation Store on PS4, and also removed the game from being backwards compatible on PS5 for anyone who still had the game downloaded on their PS4s, not allowing them to transfer the game to their PS5s. Surely, if the game did end up getting released, it would have been multi-platform eventually, but this was another project where Sony became involved, and the only console initially announced, with one of the coolest playable demos out there, was PS4. And for right now at least, we'll never find out what this game could have really been. Next up is the PlayStation 3 game 8 Days, being developed by Sony's London studio. It was initially shown off as a technical demonstration at E3 2005 and then formally announced at E3 2006 during Sony's press conference. It was a third-person action game that would take place over the course of 8 days, traveling across 8 different states, featuring 2 playable characters. The storyline involves a detective hunting a mob syndicate for kidnapping his son, and another individual who's hunting the same mob seeking revenge for some unexplained reason. Their paths would connect at some point, and they'd begin working together. Apparently, the game would feature some kind of Google Maps functionality and include real-time day and night cycles that would match the player's time zone. Publicly, Sony only showed off what looks like pre-rendered footage, but years later there's been a handful of clips released which shows early builds of the game in action. It was cancelled in June of 2008, where Sony released a statement saying, "This decision was made following an internal review of all games, and it was deemed that with the incredibly strong list of exclusive first-party titles coming up both this year and in the near future, resource should be reallocated to enhance those projects closer to completion." Just a couple of weeks later, Sony's newly appointed head of Worldwide Studios, Shuhei Yoshida, elaborated further, explaining the lack of an online mode was part of the consideration for canceling 8 Days. Before we finish discussing this game, we do need to move on to our next one though, which is The Getaway 3. This was initially shown off as a technical demonstration back in 2005 with 8 Days, both of which are games that were under development at London Studio. The Getaway franchise, however, initially came from Team Soho, an internal development studio that was eventually merged with Psygnosis to form what we know today as London Studio. However, the same June 2008 announcement about the 8 Days cancellation included The Getaway 3. At the time, this was a bit surprising given that just a few months back in March, screenplay writer Katie Elwood confirmed the game was still coming, and that apparently Sony was looking into working out a film adaptation for the title. Though it was pretty clear the game wasn't that far along, in fact it was more in a pre-production stage that wouldn't receive full attention until 8 days shipped. Despite this, there was a 2009 interview with Nicolas Doucet, who at the time was the producer and creative art director at London Studio. He was asked directly about the status of both games and said, and I quote, "I would not say they have been abandoned, just put to one side. Much work had been done, the studio just wanted to focus on its strengths, iToy and SingStar. Given the potential of iPad, priorities have been changed, but the other projects aren't dead yet. Ultimately, the decision to put those games to one side has benefited everyone." The encouraging thing here is that London Studio put out Blood and Truth for PSVR in 2019, which shares a lot of underlying DNA found in the Getaway franchise. It's clear the team is still interested in an action-oriented title taking place in the city of London, and based on the upload date of this video, London Studio has a number of job listings focusing on a AAA title for PS5. One could certainly hope that this IP, or 8 Days, might see a meaningful revival at some point down the road.
How you feeling now?
Next up is Rockstar's Agent for PlayStation 3, a game which was announced during Sony's 2009 E3 press conference as a PS3 exclusive. It was supposed to be an open-world spy game that would redefine what was possible in gaming. Ben Fetter, who at the time was the president of Take-Two Interactive, described it as having the same potential level of success as the Grand Theft Auto franchise. Initially, Rockstar Games stated Agent could launch as early as 2010, which inevitably didn't happen. Throughout 2011 and 12, the company would confirm development was still ongoing, but they wouldn't say much else. Even when Sony was asked about the game, they would deflect it to Rockstar, saying you'd have to ask them. In 2011, the president and CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment America, Jack Tretton, mentioned he wasn't even sure if the game was going to be exclusive anymore. At this point, a few images had leaked showing early art concepts of some environments that were made between 2009 and 2010, but there wasn't much else. Rockstar would go on to renew the trademark a few times up until it was finally abandoned November 2018. In 2019, Blake Hester ran a piece for Polygon which gave us more insight into what exactly happened with Agent, and to surmise, this was when Angel Studios was acquired by Rockstar. Essentially, they were given Agent in 2003, where it was meant to be a PS2 and Xbox game, and they were told this was the project that would prove their worth, which then led to the work culture at Angel Studios turning upside down, crunching constantly on the game, until the work eventually shifted to Red Dead Redemption. Then, by around 2009 to 2010, Agent was in the hands of a few different teams including Rockstar North, and it seems some assets may have been used for Grand Theft Auto 5, but that's all we really know. As far as Agent is concerned, you might have already played remnants of it in other Rockstar products. This next game is lesser known, but it had a working title called Eyedentify for PlayStation 3. This game was announced during E3 2005, and it was presumably meant to work with the PlayStation Eye accessory, which did eventually come out in 2007. Sony has never been a stranger to quirky, weird peripherals and supporting them with a lineup of software, and the PSI got the full treatment just like the iToy did on PS2. Not much is known about Eyedentify, but from the one trailer that we do have, we can see a futuristic sci-fi world where the camera is used to include you into the environment and story, potentially giving you the ability to talk back to the AI, deliver commands, and influence whatever is about to play out on screen. It's reminiscent of all the other experimental camera games that Sony has released, and one that doesn't sound all that far-fetched when you look back at all the kind of software that did end up seeing a commercial release. My personal favorite being Eye of Judgment on PS3, which used the PSI to scan real-life cards and project monsters on the big screen. For whatever reason, Eyedentify had one trailer, and then it was never seen again.
Okay, let's switch to our plan.
Roger. We'll go in, but keep an eye on us, okay?
You might not remember this one, but back in August of 2013, Sony announced LittleBigPlanet HUB, which was meant to be a free-to-play version of the franchise, but also a way to funnel in existing players importing all their previously purchased content. LBP HUB would feature full, unrestricted access to the creation tools, 16 free levels from LBP 1 and 2 story mode, curated community levels, exclusive content, and weekly challenges. Neither Sony or Media Molecule ever provided another update on the game again. Well, really, it might be better to call this a planned initiative. While there would have been new content planned, this would have also largely been a new way to monetize the franchise, especially since the free-to-play model was really starting to take off. but considering LBP3 was very close to release anyway, this might have been more of a consolidation issue. What exactly is free and what's behind the paywall? How do you set those prices and make them fair? Where does LBP3 tie in? Will it also come to PS4? I'm guessing all these questions is what inevitably led to this never happening. During Sony's 2011 E3 press conference, Ken Levine took the stage to discuss Bioshock Infinite and its utilization of PS Move support, but towards the end he also pulled out a PlayStation Vita prototype and made a very early announcement for Bioshock also coming to the platform. This was prior to the Vita being released, so at the time this was one of the more exciting prospects of Sony's upcoming portable, knowing that one of the most beloved and well-received games of the 21st century would see a proper, fully original release on the handheld. What we didn't know is that the deal between Sony and 2K wasn't even agreed upon, as revealed by Ken Levine on Twitter in 2014. They were apparently enthusiastic about the deal in 2011, enough to go ahead with a public announcement, or maybe a tease is more appropriate to say here, but still, it's one where the public was informed. And February 2014 is when Irrational was shut down and Ken Levine left, so it was pretty clear that this game wasn't coming after all. Levine did reveal what his vision for the game was though. It would have had Final Fantasy Tactics-esque gameplay set in pre-fall Rapture. An idea based on Levine's love for turn-based games, but also a concept that would work well and not have to be a compromise in any way for being on PS Vita. Another 2011 E3 announcement from Sony was Warrior's Lair for PS Vita and PS3. At a quick glance, the game is your run-of-the-mill Diablo clone. It's a medieval setting, action role-playing, with that isometric viewpoint, but the real draw is that this game was revealed as a PS Vita game that will also come with a PlayStation 3 version, designed to upload and download cloud saves so you can play interchangeably between platforms. This title was in development with Idle Minds and Sony San Diego Studios, and towards the end of 2011, they shared more details about the game's multiplayer. It had an asynchronous angle where you could make your own lair that you can customize and tweak. This would be a home base of sorts, but you'd also be able to store valuable items here that give you buffs in-game. When playing, you can encounter other players and challenge them by wagering rare items. Those items are then put into escrow for 24 hours, while both players start attacking each other's lairs. The player with the most damage wins both items. There were many other social and competitive aspects that would have played a larger focus into the moment-to-moment gameplay, but ultimately Sony canceled the project in July of 2013. A somewhat unique concept for its time, but one that maybe tried to bite off more than it could chew. Next up is Saints Row Undercover for PSP. This game had a fascinating history in that it's very well documented what went on with this game, with the information being released from the IP holder. That and the game was never even publicly announced, so at first developer Volition was looking to port Saints Row 2 to the PSP and contracted out Mass Media Games to do the work. At some point the game was then moved to Savage Entertainment, and then the realization set in that a port of Saints Row 2 was not going to work on PSP hardware. So an original Saints Row game called Undercover, which would be a sequel to the second game, was now the answer. The story would focus on the city being split by a civil war within the 3rd Street Saints, and you would play as an undercover cop investigating the fight, going through 20 story missions until you get the option to betray the police and join the crew. During development, Volition stepped in to evaluate the progress on a playable build and decided it wasn't going to match the quality they wanted for the franchise, so the project was cancelled. How all this came to light was when Josh Stinson, an associate video editor at Volition, found the PSP dev kit that had the build in the office, and after convincing some colleagues and higher-ups, they agreed to release the playable build and even the full game design document. It's a fascinating look into the process of game creation, and for those that are interested in checking out the design doc and the playable build, I'll leave those linked in the description. Another attempt of moving a well-known franchise to the PSP was The Elder Scrolls. More specifically, The Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion. This was indeed supposed to be Oblivion squished onto PSP hardware, but it should go without saying some compromises were going to have to be made. For example, Travels Oblivion would be linear and not a true open world. The game would feature a hub area with vendors and NPCs to interact with, but you'd end up using a portal to travel to the more unique locations where standard gameplay would take place. The story would be set in the Oblivion timeline, but would feature its own separate plot. Apparently, one of the initial problems with the game was NPCs not being able to appear above the player, as in, the earliest builds couldn't feature any verticality. NPCs were not properly appearing above the player if, say, you had to take a staircase to meet someone on the 2nd floor. There were also discussions about the game potentially needing to be split across 2 UMDs. In total, there would be 10 levels across 5 regions with more than 180 quests. When it came down to it though, there simply wasn't enough time and money being put into the project, which was slated for release spring 2007, so it was then cancelled. This too has some playable builds that are out there that you can try yourself. I wish we could say more about this next one, but there's really no info on what went down. During Sony's 2009 E3 press conference, Resident Evil Portable was announced for the PSP. It would be an original story, totally different from any other Resident Evil game, and apparently it was going to be made with the PSP Go in mind. President and CEO of Sony Computer Entertainment America, Jack Tretton, mentioned the game would be coming the following year, but on Capcom's blog, they claimed the game was still a ways out. That was our last update on Resident Evil Portable. Judging by the fate of other canceled PSP projects, it might have been a hardware limitation, that combined with the other factors that can plague any project, like no appropriate budget, no resources, not enough time. It could be one or it could be all those things, but the fate of this game seems forever sealed. Here's a pretty interesting outlier in our list, Oddworld Munch's Oddysee. This game, you might know, has released and is available on a number of platforms, both new and old. But the origin story for Munch's Oddysee is that it was originally going to ship only on PlayStation 2. What ended up happening was the developer Oddworld Inhabitants was working with early PS2 dev kits and were not satisfied with the console's architecture. PS2 had a reputation back then of being a higher hill to climb with getting usable code and engines up and running, requiring more time and resources than PS1. That and the publisher for Munch's Oddysee, GT Interactive, was going to cut the budget, something that Oddworld Inhabitants wasn't going to be able to bear. Instead, Microsoft offered to publish the game in exchange for it being an Xbox exclusive, and since the original Xbox hardware was more friendly to work with and offered more on-paper performance, this was ultimately where Munch's Oddysee went. So the franchise went from 2 PS1 games and an announced PS2 sequel to now launching exclusively for Xbox on the console's launch day. This next one from Sony is really strange, but Road to Sunday for PlayStation 2 was cancelled in 2005 after not meeting the quality standards set for first-party software. The game was in development by 989 Sports, that was the Sony studio back in the 90s and early 2000s that developed MLB, NCAA Final Tour, and NFL Game Day. But when EA secured the license for the NFL, this meant other publishers could not use any names or likeness for football games moving forward. So the idea for Road to Sunday was a little bit out there to say the least. The game would feature a crazy plot where an owner of a football team dies in a yacht explosion, so the son would inherit the team. But he's got a severe gambling addiction and owes a massive debt to a Jamaican gangster. To make matters worse, the debt is so large that winning football games wouldn't be enough. The player would be able to submit their players into an underground fighting circuit to earn money, and you'd also be able to play Texas Hold'em as well. Apparently there was a big focus on the risk versus reward from the gambling, but also your players getting injuries from fights, which would carry into the football games. It was either a very good or a very bad idea to cancel Road to Sunday, and I can't really decide which one I'm leaning towards. Some say this next game was mostly considered unreleased or banned, but from EA's point of view, this PS1 exclusive was cancelled. It was called Thrill Kill. This game was planned to come out in 1998, and developer Paradox Development completed the work. The game was done and all ready to go. The problem was the game itself. Thrill Kill was a 4-player arena fighter with similarities to Mortal Kombat in that the game was overtly violent. The theme being that all the fighters are already dead, souls that are vying for a chance to return back to the mortal world. They would have to fight each other and deliver thrill kill finishers in order to proceed. The original publisher, Virgin Interactive, was acquired by EA prior to the game coming out, and once EA had full rights, they reviewed the game and felt it would be a poor public image to release such a senselessly violent game. Without even attempting to sell the IP and the already completed project somewhere else, it was instead outright cancelled. The short-term upside is that all that work didn't go to waste. The engine was used for Wu-Tang Shaolin style instead. The long-term upside is that Thrill Kill was unofficially released by some former developers for anyone that wanted to download the ISO and play it themselves. There's not a whole lot surrounding this next canceled PS1 project, but it's called Jalapeño Harry, and Would you believe me if I said this was an internal project at Sony in 1998 in order to compete with Crash Bandicoot? Because that's what this was. Now, that may seem odd, but the reality is Sony did not own Crash Bandicoot, Universal did. And this was also before Sony acquired Naughty Dog. They didn't have the IP, and they didn't have the talent. So as great as it was to have Crash Bandicoot being so well received on the PS1, it wasn't something Sony could bank on forever. Little is known about Jalapeño Harry, but Naughty Dog co-founders Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin recounted this as such. The game was meant to be a platformer that could replicate what Crash was doing, and basically this just didn't work out at all. So we have no clue how far the project actually got outside of these art concepts. It might not have moved much further past this stage, but it's still a noteworthy point of history for the lineup of games on the original PlayStation. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Now, that wasn't all the canceled games that are out there. There's way more that we could have went over, but these were some of the more noteworthy ones in PlayStation history, or some of the more interesting ones too that were cherry-picked out of there, but we could probably do more of these eventually. But if you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. And that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.